Good morning, YouTubers. So my previous couple videos, I sort of did an unboxing and somewhat of a review on a couple of welding tables, a DeWalt and Hobart over there. Now I thought it's time, why don't we look at welding tables in general, kind of talk about what you should be looking for and give you a really good idea in comparison between a bunch of different types, so that you can make an educated decision and find out what you think will work for you and buy it. So that's what we're going to cover today. Let's get into it. So the first thing you really need to ask yourself is, what are you going to be using this table for? If your plan is to just do very lightweight, like sheet metal welding or exhaust welding, and you don't plan on putting, an anvil to repair on it, you can get by with a lighter duty table. If your plan is to weld on anything that you can get your hands on, including engine blocks, you're going to need something a lot heavier duty. There becomes a point where either making it yourself or buying some kind of industrial table used is the best way to go. And we're going to talk about all of that. But to start things off, we're going to talk about the most common welding table you can find. It's available everywhere, and that's the Harbor Freight style. But there's a million companies that make it. Same table, just different names. So let's look at that. So here we have a Harbor Freight table. Honestly, these are all made by one or two factories in China. Tons of people, Eastwood, all over Amazon, they all sell the same table. So this review is valid for those likely, as well as the Harbor Freight. These sell for somewhere between, $70 and $100, depending on if you have a coupon. Now, if you can't tell, this thing has been used quite a bit. So I've owned this, used it. I can definitely report what I like and what I don't like. So I think it's a great table for just setting up in your shop, or a portable, deal to where you can quick weld something to be done. This is not a good table if you have to weld on something heavy. Now, if you look here, this thing is pretty warped, partially because of heat input from welding flat plate on it, and partially because I probably have set something a little too heavy on this a time or two. So, if you got to weld on, a cast iron casting of some sort, or even just steel casting, this is not the table for you. This is great for doing welding practice. It's great for like putting an exhaust piece up and welding it. Lighter duty, this simply won't take the abuse of a heavier duty table. But again, you're only paying $100. Now, there's a couple interesting things about this. One, so you can pivot the top of the table. I don't really know what benefit that is, because it has actual locking points, like right here you could lock it. Beyond standing it up and folding the legs in to stand it up against a wall, I don't really get the pivot part as far as why you could lock it out of position, but that is, I guess, a nice feature. I've never had it let go of me while I've been sitting or welding on it, so that's a plus. It locks in decent. The legs just fold together, and then, like I said, this flips up and you're pretty much good. I'm not a huge fan of zinc coatings. On one hand, BBs from welding tend to spin right off and not stick to the zinc. However, once it gets baked off like you see, it basically has no corrosion protection. BBs will stick to it, and this isn't very thick to be grinding on to clean it up. So honestly, you want to be smarter than I was with this and make sure you spray it with anti-spatter spray. Now, from a construction standpoint, this is actually the thinnest table out of all of them that I own. Most of the strength of this comes from how they bent this groove in there, and I'll even tip the camera so you can see how much of a warp there is in that. It still works for what I'm using it for, but again, this is the main strength of this table. This does have these kind of protectors. To be honest, what they're more or less for is so that stuff doesn't slide off the table, I think, is the primary reason. I think it only comes with 2 of those. I don't believe it comes with 4, from what I remember. If it did, I don't have them anymore. I lost them. But this, I would say, if you need a welding table, very good option. You can get them pretty affordably. Not my favorite, and honestly, not what I would recommend considering other options you have out there for very reasonable rates. So let's go and look at the new DeWalt table that I just bought. So here's a DeWalt. You may pronounce it DeWalt. Hey, I'm from Wisconsin, give me a break, right? I just picked this up primarily to use as a miter stand for my dry cut saw, as well as I may put a welder on it. I'm not exactly sure, and I may bring it out to the field to weld on as well. This is a similar construction to the Harbor Freight and the generic tables where it has slots cut, mainly honestly for reinforcement purposes more than it is for usefulness, because I really don't find slots like this that useful. Like, it's a pain in the ass to get a clamp, like a vice grip welding clamp around that. And I don't know, I'm not a big fan of them. But again, it's there for strength, not necessarily for usefulness. Now, this particular table is significantly wider than the Harbor Freight, but it is narrower this way. In my experience, I rather have a table that's wider and narrower like this, because when you're sitting down, there's only so much you can reach for. Okay, having a wider table, getting over there, you gotta stand up and then hunch over or reach over to get there. So I rather have more surface this way, because as you're positioned, you know, you can reach here, here, and here easily. So the layout, I would say, is better on this table. This folds up where you have 4 legs, just like a normal sawhorse. Like, this really reminds me of a miter saw stand for a miter saw, very similar. Has some cord management down over there to wrap your cord up. Technically, you could put your welder on the end and then weld something here, although honestly, I never recommend doing that kind of stuff, and the main reason being, it's very easy to like get your cord wrapped up around your arm or your boot and stand up, and then you'll rip the welder right off the table. You'd be smarter to put the welder on something else and then maybe attach the welding cables to there to where you can weld and not rip your welder onto the floor or whatnot. Now this, the biggest detriment here, a couple things. One, it's expensive. It's double the price of the Harbor Freight at a minimum. This thing's $200 versus $70, $80, $100, so much more expensive. Is it worth it? I would say going to this table over the Harbor Freight one is. And the reason is, I think this will hold more weight. It's a little bit more useful with the layout. The fact you can adjust the height to whatever you want. And if you say you wanted to work on something, like say you're a TIG welder and you want to weld on this table, you can slip your legs underneath this and get really close to your work, and because it's adjustable for height, you can get that all set up to where it works for you. And that's the biggest thing, like with TIG welding, comfort. You have to be comfortable, because if you're not comfortable, your welds will suffer. Well, this gives far more adjustment. It's still, like I said, extremely portable. All you really have to do is pull the little, you just squeeze this handle, and then that's it. You do it for all 4. It's got a carry handle on the other side. Like, from a portability standpoint, I rather have this than the Harbor Freight. It's a little easier. But again, you're paying for that. So this has a little bit different of a surface finish. I have no idea on the durability of it. This is just like a zinc. The other one's zinc chromate. They're probably very similar. Over time, where you weld on this, it will bake this coating off and it will start to rust there. It's also worth noting this tabletop from just feels slightly thicker than the Harbor Freight, but this is still going to suffer from some durability warping issues just like the Harbor Freight. It's just the design of it. This thin of metal and whatnot will warp and twist, especially if you put heavy stuff on it. But with that said, let's look at the Hobart table. So here's a Hobart table. A little bit different of a layout than the other 2 so far. It's a flat table, no slots. For me personally, I rather have no slots on it for a normal welding table, because I can tell you, I mean, I used that Harbor Freight for almost 2 years, and anytime I put a clamp through the slot or whatever, it would just bend the slot, and then you get a bunch of heat in it and it would stay bent. So I don't see the slots as a benefit, and I don't see the bolt hole or the holes for clamps as that good of a benefit either. I mean, if your top is ½ inch thick, absolutely go with the holes. But if the top is thin like that, you're going to end up warping it, clamping stuff off of it. So again, very different style top. This is like a combination of both the Harbor Freight and a DeWalt, because it's a little bit wider than a Harbor Freight, but it's a little bit wider depth-wise than the DeWalt, just by a little bit. Now, construction of this, and I'll tip it and hopefully not have it fall. I'll just tip it over here. So the tabletop itself is about twice as thick as the Harbor Freight table. It's an 1/8 inch. They welded on this about 1/8 inch square tube on both the front and the back, and then in the middle they have really strong, about 1/8 inch angle iron. This is by far a stronger tabletop setup than the two previous ones. This probably would not warp too much if you put a bunch of heat on the top. Now, to take this down, you have to pull those two pins, and then this thing just collapses down, and then you can repin it shut. And then the reverse is true to set it up. It's very easy to set up. There's no assembly required out of the box. The feet on this are pretty close together. To me, I haven't used this enough. I really haven't used it at all, other than the unboxing initial review. This may be less stable with a bunch of weight on the top than the DeWalt and even maybe the Harbor Freight, simply because of how close those feet are together. Time will tell on that, but I can tell you from a top perspective, this is far stiffer than the other two, and I'll actually demonstrate that at the end of this video. So let's get this out of the way and talk about the heavy-duty welding table. So here is my main welding table. You've seen it in past videos. It disappeared for a while because I was in the process of moving 3 times to be exact, and I'm still not settled down yet. I got tons of stuff going on, but I finally got it back, put it on this table. I built the table out of wood, and I finally put casters on it so it can actually roll. This thing was kind of fixed in place in my old shop, and for good reason. It's very, very heavy. So what you're staring at is a custom-made temporary cover for a manhole. So this was in place before the correct cover was cast, so nobody would fall into it, but it's basically scrap. Now, this is extremely thick. I don't remember what it measures, but just by feeling it, I bet probably 1 3/8 roughly. Approximate weight, probably about 390 pounds. I picked this up off the floor once to put it on a dolly in only about 2 inches, and based on my spinal compression, I would say pretty close to 400 pounds. This is an awesome table, or anything similar to this, if it's going to sit in place or do like I did, put wheels on it, and just kind of stay in your shop. Under no circumstances would you ever want to carry this around as a portable welding table on site, not unless your truck had a crane on it. It's just far too heavy. But the plus to that is you can beat on this with a hammer all day long and it doesn't care. I mean, I've hit any sorts of bearings off of shafts, you name it, on this thing. You can see I've angle ground into it a whole bunch. That's something you don't want to do on those other tables. Like, I've tacked down pieces to this to weld and then cut them off after the fact. Well, guess what? If you did that to the other tables, you're going to cut right through them. They're just not thick enough. So from a heavy duty standpoint, something like this is the way to go. You can't beat a heavy duty table like this. Now, cost wise, I didn't pay much for this. It was scrap metal price, basically. If you go on your marketplace or Craigslist, if it still exists by you, you can find actual legit welding tables or hodgepodge crap like this for pretty cheap. And I'll put up a couple pictures now to show you what I'm talking about, but you can find substantial hunks of steel that would work, honestly, the best you're going to get for a welding table for not much more than a cheap welding table. The downside, of course, like I said earlier, this is not portable. Like, you're not taking this out to a job site. And in all fairness, this really isn't comparable to the other 3 tables because those are all designed to be portable. So it's something to think of. If I were you and you're starting to learn and you got your welder set up in your garage, I would highly recommend finding or making something like this, then going over and picking up a portable table that meets your needs to go make money out in the field and stuff. That would be my recommendation. You can't go wrong with this, but again, if portability is your main concern, this isn't for you. Not to mention, you might need to go and see a chiropractor when you're done kind of making a table like this. I mean, they're no joke heavy, but hey, you get what you pay for, right? All right, so let's talk about some more. So we're back on a Harbor Freight. I thought I would show you how flexible or inflexible these things are. I have about 40 to 50 pound dry cut saw positioned on here, and I'm just going to wiggle it around just so you can see. This is actually fairly sturdy. I mean, if you were to bump this, table's not going to fall over. The table top itself, because it swivels and pivots on that, I mean, I got it cranked down, but it's still, you know, there's flex in that. Although there's some flex, it's really not that bad. And an option you might have is to buy a table like this one and then buy a 3/16 or 1/4 inch piece of steel that's cut the same size as this. Just slip it over this. This edge and the back edge will hold it, put a little C-clamp on it to just keep it from popping off. And that would give you a really nice solid table where you don't have to worry about warping it. Of course, by the time you're done, you would have paid as much as a different table, but it's just something to think of, especially if you have this already. All right, let's put the saw on the other tables. So I got the saw on this. One thing I didn't mention earlier is that if you want to TIG weld on this, you're somewhat limited. I mean, if you were to sit on this side of the table, you could slip yourself under a little bit and get to where you could weld here while sitting. But unlike the DeWalt or even the Harbor Freight's, far easier to slip your legs under, so it's something to think of. From a stability standpoint, I mean, this thing feels rock solid this way. However, you can see, not that, you know, you can see the legs being close, much closer than a Harbor Freight. This is going to be far more likely with a good hit to tip over. I mean, I'm putting a fair amount of force on it, but you can see what I'm saying. Far easier to tip than the Harbor Freight. Will it tip? Probably not, but you know, the leg position is why that it's like that. So let's go throw this on DeWalt and see what we got. So the saw is actually a little too wide to fit on the feet here. So I might actually have to rig up a plate that it sits on just to stabilize it a little bit. I'm not too worried. I can always bolt it through the table to hold it down. This is very stable as far as like the table itself, but if you watch here, you can see all the flex in that tabletop. Now, I'm kind of exaggerating it. It's not really as bad as it probably looks. Like if I actually position this to where it's carried properly, you see how it doesn't flex as much, but it does flex more. I would say it flexes more than the Harbor Freight, despite this being slightly thicker. And well, it goes because it's, look how wide it is. And that's where like Lincoln Electric makes a table almost the same size as this, that's thicker. I think that would be the way to go over this, but it costs even more than this one, of course, because it says Lincoln on it. So that's something to keep in mind. But this, I would say you're never ever going to tip this table over. It's simply too stable. So if you're on a job site and you're really hard on stuff and you're running this stuff all the time and knock it over, this would be probably your better option. Just to be an idiot here, I said it on here, but we all know that there's not any flex in this. I mean, this is as stable as you're going to get. But of course, it comes at the cost of excessive gravity. It weighs a lot. So let's just go to conclusion, and I'll give you a couple more ideas of things to think of. So I guess where does that leave us? Well, I bought all of these tables really for different purposes. The Harbor Freight I bought a while ago just to have something I could use outside, and it's done great for that. I bought this Hobart as a portable welding table so I can weld stuff in the field, and I'm sure it will work great for that. And the DeWalt I bought primarily to set my dry cut saw on, and possibly a welder, and then also, if needed, bring it out to the field to have a secondary table. Now, if I had to pick my favorite out of them, obviously it's the custom table. Just the durability and what it can do for you is unmatched by these. But of course, there's no portability there. So if I had to pick my favorite based on just, you know, the little bit of use that I've had these, and again, both of these are pretty much brand new, I would say this Hobart at 150 bucks, it's 50 bucks more than the Harbor Freight cheap one. You get a much stronger, better top. I would say it would handle as much weight. It's a little bit tippy. It flattens down even better, I would say. If you're gonna do a lot of welding in your garage, I would recommend this over to DeWalt, and the reason is that I think the top is gonna be more durable for you. Now, it's the only one that does not have zinc coating on it, which I'm not a huge fan of breathing in zinc, which you will from time to time as the tops get hot that have zinc on them. But as long as you spray this with anti-spatter and something to keep the rust at bay, I really think from a welding perspective, this guy would work better for most of you. And that's why my intention is to bring this out to the field to do welding with more so than the other ones. Now the DeWalt, I think it's a great stable table that would work good, but if you're gonna buy that, and again, it's already 200 bucks, I would highly recommend at least getting 1/8 inch, which is what this is, or 3/16 sheet of metal, roughly the size of that, put it down and weld on that rather than a tabletop, because I think you're gonna have issues with that, just like I did with the Harbor Freight one, where it's gonna warp and bend, especially if you clamp anything to it. And that's kind of my issue. Like this guy, you can clamp right underneath this edge, and I don't think you're gonna be warping this, not like those are. So again, it's not that, you know, that's a bad table, it's a good table. They're set up for different uses, and hopefully this information will give you enough of an idea what will work for you. I really think that either, you know, the Harbor Freight and the DeWalt will work great for you, more than likely. It's just if you're actually looking to do a lot of welding on it, I think this will last longer, and it's actually more affordable than that or the Lincoln equivalent. Now, with that said, if you're ambitious and want to build your own welding table, I would highly recommend to kind of copy what Harbor Freight did with theirs, except make the tabletop flat like this out of 3/16 or 1/4 inch thick steel. Yes, it will be a little bit heavy, but man, you'll be able to use that for years without any issue. And if you nick it like I did here, which I was kind of purposefully doing that, you're not gonna cut through the table. Like any one of these cuts that you can see would have been through either one of those two tables and damn near through that one. So it's something to think of. You know, not that you should be tacking stuff to the table or cutting stuff on the table, but it wouldn't take much to cut through those two. So it's just, again, something to think of. But yeah, I really think that all of these will serve the purpose that I used them for, and I'm sure that you can find one of these that will work for you. With all that said, if you got any comments, questions, or thoughts, you know where to leave them. And thanks for sticking around for the video, guys. Till next time.